everyone. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. President Biden has unveiled a sweeping vaccine mandate taking aim at 80 million unvaccinated Americans.
We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us.
The new mandate will affect 100 million workers across the country. The president's also zeroing in on schools, calling on governors to require vaccinations for all teachers and staff. President Biden also just visited a school in Washington, saying he would do everything in his power to support the FDA in their work to authorize vaccines for children under 12. Meanwhile, the Department of Homeland Security has announced it's doubling fines for travelers who won't wear masks in airports and on planes and trains. The move comes amid a surge of air rage incidents. The FAA says it has received nearly 4,200 reports of unruly passengers since the start of the year. More than 3,000 of those involved people who refused to wear a mask. And the Department of Justice announced it's suing Texas over its new law that bans most abortions. Attorney General Merrick Garland says the law is, quote, in open defiance of the Constitution, and he's seeking a court order to prevent it from being enforced. Texas Governor Greg Abbott says he is confident the courts will uphold the law. And now to the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Let's take a look at Ground Zero this morning, where 20 years ago, 2 planes hit the Twin Towers and changed our country forever. Nearly 3,000 people were killed in what became the deadliest terror attacks on U.S. soil. And tomorrow, families will gather at Ground Zero to read the names of those who lost their lives there. Amy Robach is at Ground Zero with more. Hi, Amy.
Tomorrow marks the 20th anniversary since the deadliest terror attack here on U.S. soil, 9/11. And we know that tomorrow, as they have each and every anniversary, the names of all of the victims, nearly 3,000 people, will be read aloud here at Ground Zero, the 9/11 memorial. And we know President Biden will be on hand. There will also be increased security. Police say, though, there is no known terror threat here. But President Biden will be here for part of the ceremony where they will read those names aloud. He will also attend the ceremony at the Pentagon, where 184 people perished when that 3rd plane slammed into the Pentagon, and the one in Shanksville, where hero passengers aboard the 4th plane forced it down before those hijackers could steer it into its intended target, killing 40 passengers and crew. And while it has been 2 decades, the pain is still fresh. It is still real for so many of those family members, more than 1,000 of whom have never had the remains of their loved ones identified. That work continues here on this day that is so reminiscent of the original 9/11, a crisp September day where we all remember. Diane?
All right, Amy Robach at Ground Zero in downtown Manhattan. Thanks, Amy. And September 11th, 2001 was also a solemn day for the families of the 40 passengers on Flight 93, where hero passengers and crew stopped the 4th hijacked plane before it could hit another target. Juju Chang joins us from Shanksville, Pennsylvania, with more on that. Hi, Juju.
Diane, what you see behind me in that grassy field is essentially the crash site for Flight 93. It is the final resting place for the 40 brave passengers and crew on board. But what has blossomed from this site is a living tribute, a memorial of 40 white marble slabs, each inscribed with the name of a hero. Now, tomorrow, former President Bush, President Biden, and Vice President Kamala Harris will all be here to pay tribute alongside family members. In fact, it's only family members who are allowed to walk on these hallowed grounds. You may remember 20 years ago, Flight 93 was delayed in taking off, and that's why when it was hijacked, the passengers were able to call loved ones, and they quickly learned what was happening at the World Trade Center with the other planes. So they took a vote on board. They voted to fight back against the hijackers and to stop them from hitting another symbol of America. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting for their country. And it's that bravery we are celebrating here in Shanksville. Now, I spoke to family members of one of the flight attendants on board, CC Lyles. She was actually a former police officer turned flight attendant, and I spoke to her mom, Shirley, last night, who told me she's been coming back year after year for 20 years, but that tomorrow she doesn't want to feel sad. She wants to celebrate Cece's life, just as we as a nation are celebrating the lives of all who were lost on 9/11. Diane?
All right, we sure are. Juju Chang, thanks for that. Meanwhile, the Department of Homeland Security now says the greatest terror threat to the United States is domestic. The FBI has arrested hundreds of domestic terror suspects in the last several years. Our Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas is at the Pentagon with more on that. Hi, Pierre.
Here at the Pentagon, on this hallowed ground where American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the building, killing 59 people on board the plane and more than 100 inside Defense headquarters, they never forget. Today and tomorrow, there will be observances of that horrible day, a painful reminder of just how real the terror threat remains. And we are in an extremely tense threat environment right now. While no specific threat has been identified for the 9/11 anniversary, the FBI is being forced to deal with both domestic and international terrorism. In roughly the last 4 years, the FBI arrested 552 domestic terrorism suspects, many of them far-right radicals, including white supremacists. During that same time frame, the FBI arrested 386 international terrorism suspects, many inspired by ISIS and al-Qaeda. So at any given moment, the FBI is in various stages of investigating hundreds, if not thousands, of people inside the U.S. suspected of terrorism. So that threat remains. Diane?
All right, Pierre Thomas, thanks for that. And for nearly 20 years, we have followed the people forever linked by 9/11, the survivors, the heroes, the families who lost loved ones. World News Tonight anchor David Muir has retraced that fateful day and all of the lives that intersected, as well as their hope for the country now 20 years later.
The morning of 9/11, it was warm, it was clear skies, it was a beautiful fall.
It was a clear, beautiful morning.
Yeah, it was. I would walk past the fire department, and so I could say hi to the firemen that I would see all the time.
You were making breakfast for the girls in the kitchen.
I was. We had gotten up early. It was Anna Claire's first day of preschool.
I'm Diane Sawyer, and it's Tuesday, September 11th, 2001.
I turned on the television to watch the news.
This was your second day on the job?
My second day on the job, yes. Reporting to the Pentagon for work. It started out like a regular day.
They are the stories of 9/11, forever linked by what happened that day.
This is at the World Trade Center, and there has been some sort of explosion. We don't fully know the details. There is one report that a plane has hit the World Trade Center.
17 minutes later, the South Tower.
The plane hit one floor above you.
Yeah. And I realized if I had stayed up there, I would have been dead. What caught my attention was the fact that people that I knew were 100 plus stories up were hanging outside of the window. And I watched them. They were making a sign of the cross, holding hands, and jumping. To me, those people were heroes.
Of the last 25 people out of the South Tower, Florence was number 18. We have followed her for nearly 20 years, and we will never forget seeing those reflecting pools for the first time.
Wow.
The names of the fallen etched in bronze, and Florence's friend, Jill Moore Campbell.
I always remember Jill's smile. I try never to think about the way she died. As a company, we were very, very close. We all knew Jill.
And now, 20 years later,
a phone call from Jill's son.
Oh, I was so happy to talk to him.
Our thanks to David Muir for that, and you will meet Jake on the other end of that call and learn what it meant to him as David takes us minute by minute through the day that changed America on a special edition of 2020 tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern on ABC. And as the country mourns those lost on 9/11, survivors also carry the pain of what they lived that day. Stanley Pramans was hiding under his desk on the 81st Center's South Tower when a plane crashed through floors 75 through 82 at 9:03 a.m. Stanley says the only desks that still stood firm was his. Stanley joins me now to share his story 20 years later. Stanley, first of all, thanks for being here. I know it must be painful to record these memories, or to recall them, rather. But I want you to take me back to that day. You were in the South Tower elevator heading to your office when the first plane hit the North Tower. So what was it like heading into work that morning, and when did you first know what was happening?
Good morning, and thank you for having me on your program. Well, going back 20 years ago, first thing, I never thought I would live to see another day. Never thought I would live 20 years later to tell you this story. So it was a nice warm day. I went into the office, and when I got there, the phone rang, and my mother was on the phone, and we exchanged pleasantry. My brothers took turns in calling me to ask me if I was okay. Didn't know that the first plane hit the first building. Had I known, I would not have gone in. However, I went all the way down, and the security guard sent us back up. He says, your building is safe, it's secure, go back to your office. And I still didn't know that a plane hit that building. So now I'm back in the office, the phone rang, and a young lady from Chicago is calling me. Stan, get out. Get out for what? Stan, you're not logged on to the computer, you're not watching the monitor. No. Tell me why and I'll go. And while I'm talking to her, I realized, watching towards the south of the South Tower, which is towards the Statue of Liberty, something caught my attention. That's when I realized a plane is coming towards me, eye contact. And I just stood there mesmerized, couldn't move, and I can hear this revving sound that the engine is making as the plane starts tilting and coming towards me, as in the split seconds. And the next thing I know, with the most thunderous sound, the plane just slammed itself into the building, and all hell broke loose. That's when I realized that, you know what, this is the day I'm going to die. So I dove under the desk, and the last thing I remember saying, Lord, I can't do this, you take over. And if you beat me over the head, I still would not be able to tell you why I said what I said. The only desk that stood firm was the desk I'm hiding under. It looks like a demolition crew came and ripped the entire place apart. Every wall was flattened, the floor collapsed and is hovering over the desk. All the cables dropped from the ceiling, and they're short-circuiting. There are flames all around me. It looks like somebody took a giant bag of cement, threw it in the air, and I couldn't breathe. And I'm screaming, Lord, send anybody to help me. As I'm screaming, somebody had a flashlight on the other end of the floor, and they're shining it over their head. And that's the light I saw, and I started to crawl. Wait for me. Don't leave me to die. And I'm dodging all the cables, looking at the flames. I'm crouching, and I'm crawling. I crawl the entire length of one floor, the loans department to the lounge, a computer room, and a communication room, and one sheetrock wall stood firm, preventing me to go towards that light that I saw. I got temporarily deaf when the plane hit that building, but as I got closer to the wall, I can hear faint, and the person behind the wall is saying, climb over the wall and I'll catch you on the other side. Bang on the wall, I'll hear where you are. I tried to climb over the wall, couldn't do it, and part of the hanging loose ceiling that was there caved in, trying to prevent it from hitting my face. I raised up my hand, and a black sheetrock screw came into my palm. So I was in worse shape than before, and I started to cry out to this invisible God that I've heard so much about all 30 years. And all I did was to make a fist as tight as I could, and I punched with all my might, and my fist passed right through that sheetrock wall. If you asked me to do that today, I would never be able to. The man grabbed my fist. I said, when you see my hand, yanked my body through. I punched, the hole got bigger. I stuck my head through. The man gave me a headlock, passed his hand around my head and my shoulder, one fluid motion, and I squirmed and he pulled and I flew off on the other side. And that's how I lived. I landed on top of that man, and I rolled down 10 flight of stairs, and I don't know how to thank him. I hugged him, give him a kiss on the cheek, and he says, what are you doing? And he got up, fixed his jacket and tie, and he says, Brian Clark. I said, Stanley Pregnant? And that man did an act of kindness that I'll go to the grave remembering. He held my hand very gently, and he started to rub this little wound that I had. And the man stared me in the eyes, and he says, all my life I live as an only child. I was born and raised in Canada. I always wanted a brother, and I find that person today. And that good old Irish man put his hand around my shoulder and says, come on, buddy, let's go home. And we started the long journey home. See, you had to walk 10 flight of stairs, turn in a little landing, another 10 flight of stairs, and you cover one floor. We had 80 floors to go. As we're running out of the building, it's crumbling, it's swaying. And I'm telling this man, Brian, this building is going. And I didn't know what going meant. And he says, Stan, what you see burning there is all draperies and cosmetic and paper. By profession, I'm an engineer in steel loom bend. And as soon as we ran out that building and held on to the fence of the Trinity Church, the building imploded. And Brian and I were separated from each other. This guardian angel who brought me out to safety, he is no longer there. And I just lost it. I lost everything. By the time I would have gotten home, our little daughter, Caitlin, would not recognize me. Please don't touch me. You're not my daddy. And our older daughter, Stephanie, she was 8.5. The child just had a sandwich. She had the butter knife still in her hand. The child looks at me and says, Dad, if you didn't come home, I was going to kill myself. And when that child said what she said, after all I went through, it didn't mean anything. Because you see, that morning I left home with a prayer in my heart. The Lord, cover me and my loved ones under your precious blood. Take us to work, bring us back home in peace and safety. And now it's time for rejoicing. And 20 years ago, I still feel the same as if it's happening today. That warm, nice, sunny day, September 2001.
And Stan, it must be eerie in some ways to have today the weather be so close to what it was 20 years ago as you get ready to mark 20 years tomorrow. But we're so glad that you are here 20 years later to tell us your story, as difficult as it is. I know you also lost your memory from 2002 to 2006. So tell us about that. What happened and how did you recover?
I lost everything. I lost my speech and vocabulary. I lost my memory. I couldn't recognize the children. And I just couldn't recognize faces and places and people or anybody. So I got up and I'm sitting down on the couch and I screamed out to my wife, bring my Bible. She brought my Bible. I had a King James version of the Bible that was falling apart. And I could hear in my head all the answers to life is in the Bible, but I don't know what it meant. My pastor used to tell us that. And I start flipping the pages, and the page that flew to my attention was this Psalm 91, verse 1. That is 911 right there. And I started to read. And as I read, he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty, I just snapped out and I was able to recognize people and faces and places. I don't know how it happened, but I had memory lapsed and I had to go sessions of therapy. I couldn't remember anything even until now. Sometimes I would sit back and my wife would flip the pages of an album and I would tell her, I don't remember. But I wrapped myself around the church. I wrapped myself around the believers, and I had Christian counseling in addition to medical help. And I was able to rejuvenate and jump back on my feet and live, all because of the saving grace of God, I believe. Had he not intervened on my behalf, I would have died. So the more I wrapped myself around church and scriptures, the more I was able to elevate myself and be lifted up.
And Stanley, I just want to ask you, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to ask you really quickly, because unfortunately we're short on time. Did you ever see Brian Clark again or learn what happened to him? And how do you feel looking back on the 20th anniversary?
Brian Clark became my big brother, my older brother. Brian Clark is the man who would call me on anniversaries and birthdays and everything. And Brian Clark would be that guy who would invite me. Why don't you come home? Brian is a great cook. We will take you to work. And Brian is the kind of guy who remembers everything. Brian, I see him ever so often. He calls me all the time. We spoke only 2 days ago. And come back to the question, how do I see myself 20 years ago? I never thought I would live, but I lived. And if I was to be rescued again, I want Brian Clark to be that person rescuing me. He is my older brother.
Stanley Pramans, we so appreciate that you are here 20 years later to tell this story, and we appreciate you sharing that story with us. Thank you, sir.
Blessings.
To you as well. And coming up, now that the United States is officially out of Afghanistan, the question remains as to what lasting effect our presence there will have. When we return, hear what our experts have to say on whether or not it was all worth it. Stay with us. Welcome back. With the final withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan in recent days, the wars fought by the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan following the 9/11 attacks are now over. But questions over whether these wars were worth the cost of human life and whether they made us safer still remain. Karen Travers has more.
Ahead of the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, President Biden announcing the final chapter of America's longest war.
Last night in Kabul, the United States ended 20 years of war in Afghanistan.
America went to war in the aftermath of 9/11. Back then, the mission in Afghanistan was clear.
The Taliban allowed bin Laden and al-Qaeda to live and operate there with impunity.
But less than 2 years after the 9/11 attacks, the Bush administration turned its attention to Iraq, claiming a threat of weapons of mass destruction there.
Iraq had no role in the 9/11 attacks, full stop.
It was a terrible and ugly manipulation of the American people. They wanted someone to blame, and Saddam was a target they could blame.
The years stretched on, at times as many as 157,000 troops in Iraq and 103,000 in Afghanistan. And the strategy in the two countries shifted.
It moved from being a war against terrorism to an effort to try to nation build. Not just in Afghanistan, but in Iraq.
In May 2011, the U.S. accomplishing the original goal that led it to Afghanistan.
The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda.
But there would still be 10 more years of war.
So the morning that we woke up to the news that Osama bin Laden had been killed in Pakistan, that news led off the meeting, and then it was immediately business as usual. I think that's the moment that we realized how divorced we were from that reason for being there.
The war in Afghanistan costing the U.S. more than $800 billion. The human toll, more than 2,300 U.S. service members killed. In Iraq, more than $750 billion spent, and nearly 4,500 American military casualties. And now, 20 years after the tragedy of 9/11, a time to reflect on all that has been lost on that day and over 2 decades of war.
9/11 was a tremendous tragedy, but in many ways, the wars that resulted from it are greater tragedies that killed more Americans and certainly many more people.
I think time will tell. I hope they died for something greater. You know, while we were there, I think that a lot of folks actually did make a difference. Some folks got an education that they might not have gotten. Some folks had access to health care that they might not have gotten.
If everyone buried in Arlington knew what was going to happen, they still would have taken that deployment. They still would have said, Lord, send me. We look and say, let's live a life worthy of their sacrifice.
Karen Travers, ABC News, Washington.
All right, our thanks to Karen for that report. And after the September 11th attacks, President George W. Bush quickly announced that the U.S. would enter Afghanistan.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban regime. In the face of today's new threat, the only way to pursue peace is to pursue those who threaten it.
It was less than a month after the 9/11 attacks, and here's a split screen of then-President Bush in the White House Treaty Room, and nearly 20 years later, President Biden in that same room announcing our exit from Afghanistan. So what was it all for? Let's bring in ABC News contributor and former FBI agent Brad Garrett, senior fellow at New York University Center for Global Affairs and fellow at the Center for International Cooperation, Rina Amiri, and assistant research professor for the Center of Future War at the School of Politics and Global Studies at Arizona Arizona State, and the author of the book, No Good Men Among the Living, America, the Taliban, and the War Through Afghan Eyes. Anand, Gopal, thank you all for being here today. Brad, I'd like to start with you. Do you feel we accomplished what we initially set out to when we first entered Afghanistan?
No, and I think the issue with Afghanistan was invading Afghanistan. Going after al-Qaeda, going after bin Laden, of course. But you needed to focus on that, not focusing on taking over the entire country, which everyone knew would be a huge problem because no one has been successful in doing that. So you go 20 years later, we finally leave, and now you have the Taliban, who were running Afghanistan basically before we invaded Afghanistan. So we've created a circle, and some are concerned that we may even end up with a bigger terrorist state now that we've left, and the Taliban basically are going to run the country and probably mix in with other extremist groups.
Now, Rena, in the aftermath of 9/11, we experienced an anthrax attack, the D.C. sniper attack, entering Afghanistan, the war on terror, entering Iraq. What impact do you think all these events have had on the United States and where we are today?
I think that the whole approach of the war on terror has been, I think, has been confusing and has been misdirected in the way that we've gone about it. The way that we approached Afghanistan through purely a lens of war on terror is one of the reasons why we have failed, I think, in a very significant way. And as your previous speaker noted, it is a country where you have the Taliban in a stronger position, in a more strategic position. They are more legitimized, and the country is as vulnerable, if not more vulnerable, to terrorist attacks because we had the singular lens that I think led us to miss. So we needed a broader aperture to look at how to actually address this issue.
And Anand, you have written a lot about the effects of the war in Afghanistan on the women there. So what are some of the key points you learned in your reporting?
Well, you know, we tend to think of the war in Afghanistan as being very wasteful and destructive to Americans, and it certainly was. But an extraordinary number of Afghan civilians, men and women, have died. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. I was recently this summer in southern Afghanistan meeting Afghan women, and the stories they were telling me were just shocking. On average, they lost between 10 to 12 members of their family over the last 2 decades. Most of these losses have never been recorded by official bodies. It's really an unheralded toll. And people are on the ground have to live with this, which is all the more jarring when we consider that the Taliban control today more territory than they did on September 11th, 2001.
One of the big things that people often point to say that it was worth it is the fact that we haven't had a major terror attack in this country since. The events of 9/11 also led to a major restructuring of our security and our intelligence agencies. So do you think overall we're safer now because of that?
I think the real issue...
Sorry, Brad, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so I think we're safer perhaps from catastrophic attacks like 9/11. Do I think we're safer from lone actor attacks? And the answer is no. In fact, I think there's a bigger threat. And the problem, Diane, is that it splits, in my view, to 2 directions. One, Islamic extremists we've been talking about this morning, and obviously domestic terrorists here in this country that are extremely angry about who's in office today, how the government is running, etc. And the FBI would tell you that's our biggest threat. Again, focusing on lone actors. So I think if you want to draw a line and say, are we safer today from attack? I would say no. From a low-tech individual or maybe 2 people attack, but we clearly have gotten better at heading off anything anywhere close to 9/11.
And Anand, you seem like you wanted to add to that. Is there something you wanted to say?
No, I agree. Just to say that, you know, by invading Afghanistan and then invading Iraq, you know, we created lots of enemies, lots of people who previously had no interest in being opposed to the United States became opposed because of the excesses and the destruction caused by the war on terror.
All right, Brad Garrett, Rina Amiri, and Anand Gopal, we appreciate your time today. Thank you all. Coming up, the end of the war in Afghanistan left a permanent mark on many here in the United States. In just moments, you'll meet the children of the fallen soldiers of the 20-year conflict who now have some pretty big shoes to fill. Their stories when we return. Welcome back. As we approach the 20th anniversary of September 11th, the shadow of that day looms over the U.S., ending its 20-year war in Afghanistan. Our Ike Ajachi caught up with some of the children of our fallen soldiers who are now trying to carry on the legacy of their parents.
The Afghanistan War, a 20-year conflict that left more than 2,000 U.S. military personnel dead, including Staff Sergeant Kirk Owen. His daughter Kylie was only 9 years old when her father said he was going to enlist. At the time, she wanted to say no.
I think I just heard something in his voice, even at 9 years old, that made me know that this was important to him.
Her father,
MacGyver,
killed 1 month into his Afghanistan tour by a roadside IED.
You know, my dad went over there to provide them clean drinking water. He went over there to make sure that little girls could go to school. And he did that. And unfortunately, he was killed while he was doing that. But that doesn't mean his sacrifice meant nothing. Come here, Papa.
Now 26 and expecting her first child, Kylie carries that sacrifice with her every day.
And I've searched, you know, for the past decade for a way to honor him and to continue his service that he didn't get to finish.
Kylie is following in her father's footsteps, working for the Children of Fallen Patriots Foundation, a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. that provides college scholarships and educational counseling to military children who have lost a parent in the line of duty.
I make sure that the other sons and daughters of our fallen service members know that their mommy and their daddy meant something, and that we love them, and we will take care of them.
Some families are luckier than others. In Bethany Montjoy's case, her father survived the war and eventually came home. Her father was Technical Sergeant Tim Montjoy. He served 20 years in the Air Force before retiring in 2016. But by the time Bethany turned 18, her dad had been gone for more than a quarter of her life.
You have these thoughts of, when are they going to come back? I miss them a lot.
While her father was overseas, Bethany wanted to channel her father's legacy of service into helping other military kids who were also missing their parents. With her father, Bethany created Operation Teammate, a nonprofit based in Georgia that takes military children to sporting events and introduces them to professional athletes who teach them important life lessons like communication, teamwork, and hard work.
There are forever going to be kids that experience their parent being in the military. It lets those kids feel special and let them know they're not alone.
Across the country in Colorado Springs, Captain Nathaniel Lee was only 7 years old when his father, an Air Force captain, died in a training accident in 1997.
We moved back to Northern California, where my mom was from. I didn't want to be like, oh, this is the new kid, and he's the kid whose dad died.
More than a year after his death, Lee still hadn't opened up about his father.
It felt like taboo to talk about it. Like, you didn't want to stand out. You didn't want people to feel sorry for you.
That's where the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, or TAPS, came in. An organization that works with family members grieving the death of a military family member. It's meant to teach kids how to grieve through play. Years later, Lee became an officer in the Air Force. He was even promoted to captain, the same rank as his father before he died. But it wasn't enough. He felt compelled to do more. That's when he received an email from TAPS looking for mentors. His first mentee, Annalise Miller, whose father died by suicide when she was only 8 years old.
I remember my brother told me that it was okay to cry, but I didn't really feel like crying. And I remember I went outside and I started like looking for him because I didn't process it, and I didn't want to believe it.
Their relationship, one of a kind.
It's easier to talk to him more than other people because he understands what it's like to lose a father figure.
Lee even saved the pipe cleaner tiara she made for him several years ago.
Which is a little worse for wear over the years.
And promises to wear it to her high school graduation. Until then, Lee will continue to honor his father and build his own legacy of service by helping other military children like Annalise who are grieving the loss of a parent.
No one's grief journey is the same, right? It's all a unique individual journey that changes constantly over time. But there is also a commonality that you share with everyone else in the TAPS family that you just can't find anywhere else.
Ike Ajaji, ABC News.
Ike, thank you for that. And that does it for this newscast. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for joining us. And remember, ABC News Live is here for you all day with the latest news, context, and analysis. Be sure to join us for a special edition of The Breakdown, where I will be live from Ground Zero. That's today at 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on ABC News Live. Stay safe, everybody. Never forget.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.